You know, I've now scrapped 3 separate game reviews that I've worked on since starting this channel, those being Hellblade, Life is Strange, and Call of Cthulhu. And after sitting down to write the script for this video, I can't help but feel as though there's no other way to describe my creative flow than a clown with Tourette's syndrome. I'm about as unpredictable as one, and any onlooker can point at either and describe it as just more sad than funny. In seriousness, if you combine the frustration of having to constantly start over the recording, writing, and editing process of each review with a mental state rising and falling like a suicide practice run, then you have a pretty scrambled video lineup. For real, I went from one of the best narrative games I've ever played to one of the worst narrative games I've ever played to a psychological horror game loosely based on one book I love and one book I've never even read. And now to Dead Space, an action horror game released in 2008 by Visceral Games before they were called Visceral Games, and published by the Disney of game publishers. Dead Space takes place in 2508, where fighting over resources destroyed and consumed all of our resources, and now we need to leech them off other planets. The game opens with our main character Isaac Clarke and a team of engineers on their way to repair one of the oldest mining ships in the CEC, the USG Ishimura. Within about 30 seconds of arriving, they find these fucking things, and from that point onward, it's our job to slowly piece together parts of the ship to find out what the fuck even happened here and how you're gonna get out before your bones get scrambled like a playlist on shuffle. Taking a step back, it's clear from the very beginning that Isaac doesn't really give a shit about fixing the Ishimura. He's really just there to make sure his girlfriend Nicole is okay. Which I hope is all you're prepared to hear about Isaac, because he's about as boring as a Hollywood relationship without an abuse scandal. Sure, you could argue that Isaac being so bland might have something to do with him being a silent protagonist, and he's supposed to be a self-insert for the player. But why then would you write him in with relationships and feelings independent of the player themselves? You don't get to have it both ways, Visceral. Doing this doesn't make me relate to Isaac, it just makes me confused whenever he doesn't turn around and say, you know what, how about one of you two lazy fucks run across the ship killing hundreds of aliens to get a new graphics card for the captain's computer? Flip a coin and you'll have one of the other 2 members of the Dead Space cast, one of which is Zach Hammond, the crew leader who understands how in over his head he is, but is doing his absolute best to control everything. This character is immediately juxtaposed by Kendra Daniels, one of the most annoying side characters I've ever had to bear witness to, who bitches at Hammond every time something goes wrong.
Is everyone okay?
What? What the hell were you thinking? Were you trying to get us killed?
I just saved our asses, Miss Daniels.
This cunt had me so annoyed throughout my playthrough that I was largely just trying to finish the game in order to see her body thrown around like a beanie baby in the hands of a 3-year-old. The overall plot of Dead Space is fairly straightforward. Fight your way through the Ishimura while everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong.
What the hell is happening down there? What happened to the shuttle?
That was our ride home.
Get a tram to the bridge, Isaac. I'm gonna take us back into a geostation.
Wait, we're not safe yet. Ship's asteroid defense system is offline. Wait, Isaac Hammond, you're not gonna believe this. Oxygen levels are falling.
Seriously, every time something new fucks up for Isaac, it's like a fucking punchline. While exploring the ship, you slowly begin to find out what happened to trigger the space apocalypse, and in order to explain this, I need to bring everyone to an understanding of Dead Space's fictional religion, Unitology. So sit down, speak when spoken to, and welcome to church. Unitology is a religion largely based around an alien artifact called the Marker, a giant spiraled rock with engravings on it that supposedly speaks to anyone it comes into contact with. However, anyone who does come into contact with the Marker begins to hear voices and go insane until they either kill anyone around them or themselves. The quote-unquote founder of Unitology is one Michael Altman, who somehow came into contact with the Marker and was able to resist the messages from it. Despite Altman insisting that he didn't give a shit about the Marker, Unitologists insisted that he was a prophet until they just killed him and wrote him down as the founder. Which I guess is one way to promote your religion. Makes me wonder about that Jesus guy. What a fucking show-off. After Altman's death, Unitology continued to evolve, and its followers believed that the Marker would lead them to salvation. Cut forward to Dead Space, and you find out the thing that sent everything to the dead center of fucked Avenue was the discovery of a marker on the planet the Ishimura cracked into. This predictably rocked the faith of a few passengers. I mean, imagine Jesus coming back to Earth with an AK gunning down children's hospitals. Yeah, some people would be all for it, but I'm sure most people would start either putting towels or guns to their heads pretty quick. The Unitologists who remained faithful dealt with religious insanity plus regular insanity, which I'm sure didn't bode well when that combo hit people who were doctors and scientists.
Initial restraint was problematic, but now the patient's resting comfortably. He trusts me, Dr. Kind. He puts his life in my hands. He knows his part in all of this. understands what I'm doing.
This is all information that you find in the background through text and audio logs, and I think it's pretty fucking cool to have this much of the story revealed to the player in such an organic way. My personal favorites are logs from one Jacob Temple, who starts off trying to fix shit, gives up when he finds out how fucked everything is, and dies trying to find his girlfriend on the ship. It made the Ishimura feel very lively and helped me to connect with the world the game was giving me. By the end of the game, all of this information comes together when Isaac finds out Kendra was an agent sent by the government to retrieve the marker on the Ishimura and cover up the entire situation. After this is revealed, she decides to add salt to the wound and reveal to Isaac the rest of the video he was watching in the beginning of the game, which I guess the government received beforehand and showed to Isaac to get him to come with without him thinking anything was wrong. Sounds a bit convoluted when you think about it, and my head's already hurting from hearing Kendra talk, so let's just get to her death scene. You take out the final boss and get some bad memories in your ship's new cockpit, and the story ends. Overall, it's a fairly simple course of events with layers upon layers if you have the time and autism to look through it all. And just think, I spent all this time analyzing the story that I haven't even gotten to touch on the gameplay and horror elements of the game. Aren't you excited? Dead Space's gameplay is pretty standard, following the basic idea of what if we did Resident Evil 4 but you can move while you aim. Though, in fairness, Dead Space adds its own gameplay gimmick by encouraging the player to dismember their enemies to kill them rather than aiming at the body, which I'm sure would be a much cooler and more organic game mechanic if it wasn't shoved down your throat like phallic objects at a Bill Cosby sleepover. The other mechanics are a bit less heavy-handed in their execution, but that's not much of a plus when the only other two noteworthy abilities other than the weapons are slow enemy and pick up object. Though I will admit, stasis is a super useful mechanic that you'll be using throughout most of your playthrough, though lower difficulties do render it kind of pointless. I'd recommend going through the game on hard mode. Your mistakes will be punished heavily and you'll be surviving off bare essentials, but it makes for a much more tense experience. Especially since easy mode is more pathetic than whatever self-deprecating joke I can make about myself. Though, all things considered, the gameplay is surprisingly solid, with the highlight being the weapons you can use. Pick your poison. Do you want the standard pistol, a military-grade rifle, a telekinesis buzzsaw, a supercharged blast, or one of the others that I didn't have the credits to buy? With the number of options that you have to completely fuck over your enemies, it almost excuses how annoying the game is to control. For context, this was played on the PC port, and I know pointing this out is tantamount to complaining about the video quality of a movie being played on the Game Boy, but I think I deserve at least a bit of time to rant about this. Otherwise, I'll take it out on my dog when I see him next. The PC version of Dead Space has pretty shitty aiming controls due to the aiming speed being tied to the frame rate. The most effective way to solve this issue is to install a mod and then turn your VSync settings inside out. However, doing this also made my gamepad not work when trying to record for gameplay, so I was forced to play a game with its controls geared towards console only with a mouse and keyboard, which resulted in annoyingly low sensitivity except for a few areas where it could get cranked to 1,000,000 and I could barely see what I was doing. If you're able, just play it on console and you'll save yourself a headache. But at this point I pussyfooted my way around the main genre of the game long enough, and there's no avoiding my thoughts that Dead Space is kind of underrated in terms of horror games of the last generation. That's not to say that people don't like it or that the people that do like it are wrong for feeling that way, but I think the game's subtlety issues are kind of overblown considering how the game performs as an action horror title. Before I go on, though, I should probably address the main criticisms I have of the game's horror so that the guy in the back drinking nail polish won't beeline it for the dislike button as soon as he finds the strength to stand. The necromorph pretends to be dead then jumps up to spook you trick is more overdone than jokes about the Star Wars prequels, and it wasn't even scary the first time it happened. Hell, you see the shadow lie down like 3 seconds before you turn the corner. That shit is almost as annoying as when one pops out of a vent behind you for the 30th fucking time. Now that I've appeased Clarence, I think most people who enjoy the horror elements of this game will agree with me in saying that Dead Space is a video game version of Evil Dead. And what I mean by that is that Dead Space approaches horror in a very over-the-top and theatrical sense. It opts to have shit jumping out at you at every 15 seconds, constantly having you guessing, with a main character that can never seem to catch a break. At the end of every session I have of this game, instead of quaking in my boots and jumpy from every noise around me, I'm more exhausted and tense, ready for whatever pussy patrol might scream its way into my sights. One of the things most criticized about Dead Space is this opening segment, where our main characters don't even get to spend 2 minutes on the Ishimura before every necromorph on this side of the galaxy brain broke through and started sticking their bone knives where the sun don't shine. Most people will rightfully say that this is a very over-the-top opening segment, and they're right. But I wouldn't call this a negative. For one thing, it works to be as transparent as possible as to what kind of game this is. This is a haunted house ride with a lot of loud noises and flashy effects. Not a subtle psychological thriller where every crevice in the walls is meant to signify a piece of Isaac's slowly decaying brainstem. The second reason is that a more quiet and thoughtful introduction wouldn't have made sense for the enemies that we're up against here. Think about it, these things hear a clink from across the ship and they're there in 15 seconds to make sure that that noise never fucking happens again. Why wouldn't they inspect the massive explosion that just almost tore a hole in the ship? Hell, I'm surprised they didn't show up sooner. This is amplified by the way that the heads-up display works, as it seems as though every effort was made to make sure the player feels as immersed as possible. The game is always displaying the right amount of information to the player, and the HUD being there in real time helps the sci-fi setting and aforementioned immersion. In conclusion, Dead Space is a fucking amazing action horror experience that I would recommend to anyone looking for a good time and a good couple of spooks. Don't get me wrong, it's not the scariest game I've played by a long shot. I've sat through all of Silent Hill 2, and that game is fucking burned into my memory. But this game laid out a foundation for a franchise that remained consistent and true to its roots until the very end. Ah, fuck.
The devil still